So how realistic is a deal between the Mexican government and drug cartels? Well, let's bring in Kurt Hackbarth and ask him. Kurt, you're an investigative journalist. You join us from the Mexican city of Oaxaca today. What's the thinking from the government on this? If you can't beat them, then cut a deal?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. I want to put what the president said in a bit of context. The president was talking more in terms of, if you see his whole clip at that press conference, of an exhortation to drug cartels to stop the violence. This wasn't an idea of sitting down at a table with them or entering into open negotiations. So I think we shouldn't overstate what the president said in response to that very important question that was at the press conference. So it's rather a different situation from what we saw in El Salvador with Bukele, where his government, although they denied it, was engaged in direct negotiations with the Maras and other organized crime groups there. That's not what AMLO was precisely saying at the press conference. He was talking more in terms of communication and sort of exhortation, but not cutting an open deal in that sense.
Okay, so what could it look like for Mexico then? If it's not sitting down at a table and speaking to drug lords, how do you can't just exhort them to end violence.
No, it's a very complicated issue, and you're absolutely right. And I think this is something that AMLO has understood, right? If you look at the history of Colombia, right, which went through decades of militarization, hundreds of thousands of people displaced or killed, U.S. bases on Colombian soil, and cocaine production in Colombia continues to be very high. So you can't simply militarize your way out of a drug crisis. So AMLO has set up a series of social programs, scholarships, an apprenticeship program. He's raised wage. The economy in Mexico is actually doing very well in macro terms, right? The GDP is rising. Unemployment is down to 2.8%. Foreign direct investment is at a record high. So companies are not being scared away by the violence. Actually, companies are coming to Mexico, right? So the macro debt is down. The macroeconomic numbers are good. Now, having said that, social programs and economic growth is a medium to long-term problem. In the short term, the violence remains high. AMLO inherited a stubborn violence problem and hasn't reduced the numbers significantly. So it's a multi-pronged approach. I think open negotiations with organized crime groups is very problematic from a legal and from a human rights point of view. So I think it's not just a question of, let's just talk to them, right? These are criminal groups that have carried out grave crimes, right? The mothers in this collective who were talking to the president at the press conference today, they've been searching for their loved ones for years, and what they were asking for is basically a ceasefire so that they could go and look for their bodies, right? This drug war that was launched since 2006 by Felipe Calderon with U.S. arms has basically turned Mexico into a graveyard. There are mass graves all over this country, and what these family members want is to be able to find their loved ones and give them a decent burial. They're talking about basically a ceasefire in a large sense.
But Kurt, look, I hear everything you're saying. By the way, one quick note, you're saying AMLO a lot, which is shorthand for the president's name, right. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, just for all our viewers, make sure they understand. Yep, AMLO, for short. I hear everything you're saying, but so at the end of the day, what is the strategy? You talked about economic policies, amongst others, but what is the shorter-term strategy for ending the violence? Is there one?
Yeah, I mean, that's part and parcel of his whole strategy. Lopez Obrador is up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day for his security roundtable, and then has his press conference, every day at 7 o'clock, giving out the numbers and the stats. The strategy has been to use what's called a National Guard, which is a sort of militarized police force, in an attempt to basically pacify the country. Remember, when Lopez Obrador, AMLO, took power, the federal police were totally corrupted, right? As were the state police and municipal police, groups. As we saw in this recent trial of the former security minister, Genaro Garcia Luna, in New York City, right? He was the security minister of the country under Felipe Calderon, was in hoc with the Sinaloa cartel. So the idea has been to attempt to pacify the country through the National Guard system. Has it worked? Not enough. Not enough. Violent crime is down 10%. Violent crime is down more significantly. It hasn't worked enough. And so I think that's why we see the frustration of these families of victims who are saying, If we've got to resort to more radical measures, then let's open that conversation.
Kurt Hackbarth, thank you so much for joining us on the program today, and thanks for those explanations. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.